Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. All right, we had to squeeze in a few important Saturday items into this one, and it's once again very long. If we didn't have to concern ourselves with Trump anymore, it could be half as long. If our politicians weren't assaulting democracy, it could be a third as long. But alas, that said, I've decided to take the next couple of days off to sort out some possible funding avenues for the podcast and other life obligations that I've had no time for. So feel free to listen to this episode in 2 or 3 pieces. In fact, it would probably be best so that you can better absorb it all, since it's largely heavy and depressing, but there's some good UBI news as well. Shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park and Shay Meehan, as well as all our other patrons. You all keep me going. Now, I'm starving, so let's get the show on the road. We have another 2 Humanity Forward endorsements. Alan Cohn is an award-winning investigative journalist running to be U.S. House Representative from Florida's 15th. He's been holding the powerful accountable his entire career. He's also seen firsthand the pain and suffering of our communities, which is why he supports direct cash relief, as well as a universal public option for health care, closing tax loopholes, and restoring environmental protections. Kara Eastman has an impressive resume as a nonprofit entrepreneur, small business owner, and social worker. She knows firsthand what is required to rebuild our economy to work for the people. She is running to be a U.S. House Representative from Nebraska's 2nd District. She supports emergency UBI, but would be well worth supporting for her democracy reform policy alone. Anti-corporate PAC money, anti-gerrymandering, pro-automatic voter registration, and pro-public campaign finance. All right, let's get the Trump crap out of the way. If you ever wanted a comprehensive review of how Trump uses his businesses and government position to enrich himself through bribery, the article below has you covered, stringing together Trump's finances, communiques, and direct sources from those who bribed him for access to government resources, how he uses his businesses as access points to profiteer from the presidency, and more. It's nearly bottomless and not even hidden. He's blatantly selling out America for personal enrichment. Too long to really get into. Article link below. Likewise, if you have ever wanted a comprehensive review of all the ways in which Trump has waged war on the scientific community, Nature has an article for that as well. It details all the ways in which he has denied scientific fact, excluded scientists from influence in government, sabotaged efforts to mitigate the humanitarian catastrophe of climate change, rolled back protections on water, air, food, and other quality, and more, again, for personal enrichment. His rejection of science has already cost tens of thousands of lives, and the lasting damage will cost many, many more. Good one to bookmark and refer to. Many health officials were caught by surprise by Trump's sudden promise to deliver drug discount cards to seniors, saying they didn't know it was happening until it was announced. Health officials are now scrambling to get the nearly $8 billion plan done by Election Day, as ordered by Trump, according to sources from Politico. The taxpayer-funded plan is being justified inside the White House and the Health Department as a test of the Medicare program, despite having no control group, making it essentially incapable of producing reliable data. The cards would resemble credit cards used at pharmacies to help cover a portion of seniors' out-of-pocket drug expenses and could be branded with Trump's face or name. However, the cards only offer $200 for a 2-year period, making them fairly inconsequential compared to current drug costs, though I can't argue with giving people money. It's a fallback plan to garner votes after Trump's promises to lower drug prices never materialized. It would be paid for by tapping Medicare's trust fund and cost $7.9 billion, including about $51 million to create and distribute the cards, and $19 million to send letters touting the plan, which seems like an absurd amount for letters. Verma, the Medicare chief, has repeatedly warned that the fund, which is largely paid for by taxes and Medicare premiums and used to cover seniors' health care, is at risk and insisted it should be protected from political maneuvers. It goes without saying this is one of Trump's many last-minute scrambles to attempt to show himself fulfilling promises that have languished for the past 4 years. Many are also concerned of profiteering from pharma companies and whatever company will be making and managing the cards and transactions therein, considering Trump's history of shady dealing. Speaking of healthcare, Cornell University researchers just completed a massive endeavor analyzing 38 million English language articles about the pandemic to distinguish the largest sources of misinformation and conspiracy theories. The result? Exactly what you'd expect. President Trump was the largest driver of the infodemic, instigating nearly 38% of the overall misinformation conversation. Public health experts have long known that clear, concise, and accurate information is the foundation of an effective response to an outbreak of infectious disease. Dr. Joshua Sharfstein, a vice dean at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and a former principal deputy commissioner at the FDA, says misinformation about the pandemic is one of the major reasons the United States is not doing as well as other countries in fighting the pandemic. This should come as a shock to no one. When you tell people it's no more dangerous than the flu, ignore masks and social distancing, call the virus a hoax, say it'll go away on its own, and spread rumors about BS miracle cures, people die. 211,000 so far. Nearly 50 academic experts in foreign policy and international relations from prestigious schools across the country wrote a joint letter to denounce Trump's foreign policy actions. Quote, "We, the undersigned scholars of international relations and foreign policy, view the Trump foreign policy record largely as a failure. The administration has emboldened U.S. rivals and alienated many vital U.S. allies. Crises at every level have been mishandled, from the global COVID-19 pandemic and climate change to slowing or containing national nuclear programs in Iran and North Korea. The United States, once a world leader, is seen as weak and disengaged by many leaders and in many populations across the world. The result is greater instability, insecurity, and human suffering. We need new leadership." End quote. That declining respect across the globe is well documented in polls, by the way, which show Obama was incredibly respected while Trump is largely despised by the free world and favored more in authoritarian regimes. The letter cites a dozen examples, including the U.S. trade war with China, increasing tariffs while falling far short of raising U.S. exports, ignoring Russia's continued undermining of our democracy, and North Korea's continued nuclear weapons program, despite the exchange of fawning letters between Trump and Kim Jong-un. I'm surprised the debacles in Syria and Ukraine were not included. In both cases, Trump ordered our troops to step aside and allow authoritarian leaders to invade, subjecting and killing or displacing civilians and our allies, all for no gain. But I suppose if you included everything, the letter would be unreasonably long. Okay, we've had too much Trump already, but this last one may provide you a tragic chuckle. Trump has been endorsed by the Taliban. Yeah, that Taliban. A senior Taliban leader told CBS News, quote, "We hope he will win the election and wind up U.S. military presence in Afghanistan." End quote. The Taliban went on to say they think highly of Trump's America First creed and praised his honesty. When someone tells you Trump, the guy who lies a dozen times a day, is honest, that tells you a lot right there. I think the most fitting line from them was this, from a senior Taliban member, quote, "Trump might be ridiculous for the rest of the world, but he is sane and wise man for the Taliban." End quote. That does indeed seem the type of mentality that it would take to find Trump sane and wise. So in summary, Trump is liked by dictators and terrorists, but hated by scientists and leaders of the free world. Something to consider. All right, enough Trump. Let's go to California, bastion of progressivism, where prisons have taken drastic measures to combat the coronavirus, such as halting rehab treatments, religious services, and educational classes, but authorities did keep one operation running, forced labor? Yes, while everything else shut down, prisoners continued to stitch face masks 12 hours a day in a sewing factory at a women's prison. Prisoners say they churned out masks by the thousands but were forbidden from wearing them, almost like working in the White House. It became even more so when, inevitably, COVID broke out in the factory, infecting at least 4 incarcerated workers. Super not cool, California. To the north, Canada's National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report, I know it's a dark episode, I know, is now recommending a Canadian UBI. The inquiry's commissioners gathered testimony from more than 2,300 people, survivors of violence and family members of women who were murdered or went missing across the country for 2 years. It says that the inescapable conclusion is that Indigenous women, girls, and LGBTQ people have experienced genocide. Very strong language. One of the authors, Robinson, explains that poverty is a root cause of violence against women and other vulnerable groups, especially those in the Indigenous community who were economically suppressed by the government. Commissioners heard from women who stayed with violent partners because they couldn't afford to leave or get other housing. They heard from women who didn't report violence because they relied on the perpetrator for income, and from women who were forced into sex work because it was their only way to survive. These are some of the darkest forms of exploitation people are made to endure due to lack of unconditional income. UBI would not only prevent these scenarios, it would lift these people out of poverty and afford them opportunities to grow and contribute more to society. On that note, an interesting article came out on how the GCC, or Gulf Cooperation Council, Arab states are primed to trial a UBI because they are currently engaged in a federal jobs guarantee program and heavy welfare spending, which has resulted in a bloated and wasteful public employment sector and anemic private sector. The common objections to UBI of cost and work incentives are negated. UBI would clearly be not only an improvement in freedom and quality of life there, but a way to reduce wasteful spending and increase private sector employment. Sounds like fertile ground. Let's get it done. Better yet, one South Korean city has implemented a UBI program very much like what both Yang and Mark Cuban have proposed. It provides money to every citizen every month that must be spent locally. It's been a massive boon for small business and citizens alike and is propelling the campaign of a presidential candidate as well. Favor for a national UBI in the country is on the rise. I think we could learn a great deal from the results of this program, which is being extensively mined for data. Check the link below for a short video detailing more about the program. In South Carolina, the debate between Lindsey Graham and Jamie Harrison has been changed to an individual interview format after Graham refused to take a COVID test after being recently exposed to infected Republicans in Washington. Harrison says he will not put family and reporters at risk by going ahead with an in-person debate with Lindsey. Many are speculating that Lindsey's refusal of a test indicates he either doesn't want a debate or is infected with the virus. You know how you know when you're on the right side? When 19 of your favorite Star Trek cast, along with Stacey Abrams, Cory Booker, Andrew Yang, and Pete Buttigieg, throw an event to support your campaign, which is exactly what Biden's got going on for him on October 18th at 6 p.m. Eastern. RSVP at joebiden.com/trekthevote or at the link in the show notes. All right, we need to take a few minutes to really dig into just how corrupt we've allowed our democracy in America to become, to the point that it isn't really a democracy at all in many respects. In 2019, writing the decision for Common Cause versus Rucho, Chief Justice Roberts closed off the federal courts as an avenue for addressing partisan gerrymandering, instead telling citizens to propose state constitutional amendments. In many states with state houses gerrymandered beyond reach of the people or otherwise beholden to special interests, these citizen amendments were the only avenue left for addressing democracy reform and other policy concerns. For instance, in North Dakota, citizens looked to strengthen overseas military voting and election audits, open primaries to all voters, and enact instant runoffs with their citizen proposal. North Dakota is dominated by the Republican Party, and closed, low-turnout primaries favor the incumbent party. Facing intense and unprecedented political pressure from more than 100 Republican leaders who filed an amicus brief, including the governor as well as the state's entire congressional delegation, the court ruled the citizens' initiative was invalid because it included a reference to a statute. The ruling lacked any solid legal basis or grounding in precedent, as in the last 18 years, 6 other qualified measures have also included reference to a statute. The 36,000 North Dakotan voters who signed petitions to put this on the ballot had their voices silenced when they tried to use the only realistic tool they had at their disposal. What will be on North Dakota's ballot this fall? A measure advanced by the GOP legislature that would require ballot measures approved by voters to then be approved by the legislature as well. The state legislature is controlled by Republicans since 1994, outnumbering Democrats 79 to 15 in the House and 37 to 10 in the Senate. In other words, pro-democratic reforms are suppressed and anti-democratic reforms continue to amass. And you remember that poll tax in Florida? Well, 64% of voters amended the state constitution to restore voting rights to ex-felons, but the state's gerrymandered Congress modified the provision to require fines and fees to be paid before regaining the right to vote. A divided 11th Circuit Court of Appeals allowed this vote to move forward in direct contradiction to the intent of the amendment and its backers. There, too, partisan courts supported gerrymandered partisan legislators in subverting pro-democratic reform. In Arkansas, with 2 different amendments, citizens worked to establish an anti-gerrymandering independent redistricting commission, open primaries, and ranked choice voting. But in Arkansas, a state statute requires that signature gatherers pass a state and national background check as performed by the Arkansas State Police. The only problem, the state police are not authorized to perform national checks. Thus, the court easily threw out the proposal, as it can do for any citizen proposal, since anti-democratic state law makes reform by citizen initiative literally impossible. Citizens in these states, and many others, have no voice unless everyone starts demanding democracy be protected. Voters in the minority party are completely unrepresented because gerrymandering ensures their candidates will never win, and they are cut off from bypassing those non-representatives by anti-democratic laws. These have become one-party states, otherwise known as authoritarian states, like China or North Korea. If the voters of the majority party in these states looked at the inevitable outcome of one-party states, they would see that they too will become oppressed in time as the party continues to consolidate power until they need not care for the wishes of any voters at all. This is how democracy dies. When citizens are completely shut out from democracy, is it any surprise that we see radical groups, whether they be fascist or communist or otherwise, growing in the country and rejecting the very concept of democracy in favor of authoritarianism? If democracy is not providing them any representation, what do they get from it? When the courts, which are supposed to be the impartial safeguard against laws that infringe on the rights of citizens, especially the right to be represented in government, become partisan accomplices in the oppression, what can we expect except revolt? Just as the justice system is too often an enabler of racist oppression, it is also too often an enabler of democratic oppression. And nothing exemplifies the problem more than the current battle going on over RBG's seat on the Supreme Court. It's clear to all that this is a blatant fight to stack the court in favor of one party over the other. We are openly corrupting our courts with partisan ideology. We can see in the examples above how that leads to erosion of the most fundamental rights of our Constitution. When oppressed people have no legal path to reform, violent revolution is the inevitable conclusion. It's how our country was founded, after all. This is why stacking the courts with ideologues is a serious matter. It's why gerrymandering is a serious matter. It's why campaign finance is a serious matter. We need to stop fighting each other and get serious about fixing our democracy before it is too late. Speaking of, after a federal judge struck down Texas's attempt at voter suppression, ruling that there was no evidence the measure to limit voter access to ballot drop-off locations would increase security, Texas is appealing the decision to a court of 3 Trump appointees. Wonder how that'll go. Partisan courts are poison to our democracy, And the Republican Party has been gleefully creating partisan courts for the last 4 years. If we want to retain our freedoms, we have to fight for them. And it doesn't take as much as you think. If you commit to spending an hour a week phone banking, text banking, canvassing, or otherwise effectively working for democracy reform, and you convince at least one other person in your life to do the same, an exponential wave of activism can quickly put the brakes on autocratic corruption. Hook up with Represent Us, or Lawrence Lessig's operations, or help get candidates into office who will fight for it, like Washington's Humanity First candidate, Marilyn Strickland, who is holding her first open text banking session this Wednesday at 6 p.m., complete with a training session. All it takes is a little time and effort to secure the future we want, gang. Let's get it done. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Check out Kara and Alan, bookmark and share The Profiteering, Assault on Science, Misinformation, Foreign Policy, Taliban Endorsement, Democracy, and UBI threads. Commit to volunteering and get your friends, family, and coworkers to do the same. Help recruit other organizations to the cause and get everyone to sign the UBI petition. Flood Congress and Trump with calls, tweets, and letters using the Resist bot or Income Movement easy contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, United Way, or the H3 podcast thread. And don't forget to Yang Daily.